Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here, and today I want to give you guys a very simple video where we're just going to go through 3 different types of images. And I'm going to explain damage buckets in Diablo 4 so that you can help you understand and maximize your damage in game so that you're able to clear all the high tier nightmare dungeons with relative ease, or at least you're able to go further in your progress. So damage buckets is a very, very simple concept. Okay. What it means is that within each damage bucket, all the specific damage bonuses that apply to that bucket is additive within that bucket, while across buckets it's multiplicative. Before I go explain further with regards to using this example, let me just talk about what are the different buckets that we have. Okay, so first off, main stat, very, very straightforward. Your main stat will always give you a damage bonus. The more you have, the more you get. If I'm not wrong, it's 10 for 1%. Yeah, 10 of your min stat for 1%. So min stat varies across classes. So for Necro and Sorcerers, it's Intelligence. For Rogue, it's Dexterity. For Barbarian, it's Strength. And for Druid, it's Willpower. So that's min stat, the first bucket. Second bucket we have is Critical Strike, which is basically your critical damage or critical strike or critical rate. Whatever it is, this is a very, very standard concept in all games with DPS concepts, right? Genshin has this as well. Many other games have this as well. D3 has this as well. So critical strike chance to deal critical strike damage. Very, very straightforward. Your critical strike chance, based on your critical strike chance, then you deal X percentage of critical strike damage, which is again based on your critical strike damage anyway. Okay, so second bucket done. Third bucket. Now this is something that's new in Diablo 4. This is vulnerable. Basically, vulnerable is like a status effect that you apply on the enemies. So you just need one player to apply vulnerable on enemies, and every player will benefit from this. Vulnerable bonus damage is 20% base. Any additional bonus is specific to the individual player's vulnerable damage bonus. So let's say you are in a party. Player A, or not, okay, not even party. Let's say you're just doing an event, okay, in the open world. Player A applies vulnerable on the enemies. You are doing the event together. Player B, Player C, Player D all will stand to gain from the vulnerable bonus, the minimum 20%. If Player B has 100% additional vulnerable, then Player B will do 120%. And likewise for Player C, if Player C has 70%, then it will be 90% total. So this is how vulnerable works. But the most important thing that you have to note here is that vulnerable is a separate damage bucket all by itself. Okay, all by itself. Now next we have the 4 different type of damage buckets here that I like to call the conditional damage bonuses. So these damage bonuses are active only when you meet their specific conditions. So for example, for the damage with bucket, you have damage with core, damage with lightning. There's a lot more. I'm not going to list every single one. You notice that I just list 1 to 2 examples each so that you can understand how it works. You can easily see this in the status screen in-game when you look at all the different type of damage bonuses that you have. So if you are using a core skill, so you will stand to benefit from the damage with core. If you are using a core skill that is lightning, then you will stand to benefit from both the damage with core and damage with lightning. Okay, additive together within one bucket. Next, you have the damage from. So damage from, for example, damage from dodging. So this is specific to rogue where after you dodge, you gain a damage bonus. There's also one that's specific to necromancer, damage from golems. I believe it's obtained from the Paragon Board, some of the Paragon nodes. So basically, when you have a golem active, the golem will just give you a damage bonus. Simple as that. That's why it's called damage from. Now, damage versus, just the versus should be very clear, right? So it's versus a specific type of enemy or an enemy inflicted with a specific type of condition. So you have damage versus elites or damage versus crowd control. So that if the enemy is crowd controlled in any way, any type of crowd control, you gain this damage bonus. So again, remember they are all additive within their buckets. Now we have damage wow. So damage wow is more like a status effect on yourself. So if you are healthy, you get this additional damage bonus. If you are fortified, you get the additional damage bonus from damage while fortified. If both applies, then you get additive from the 2 of them. The last one will be a all X increased damage. This is something where you will see a X preceding the number itself, typically from skill tree passives. So what this X just means is that it's a multiplicative factor. Some examples that I can give would be like Pit Fighter or Fueled by Death. So if I show you guys a Fueled by Death, okay, this is a Necromancer passive. Fueled by Death gives you X 9% increased damage for 6 seconds after consuming a corpse. So the moment you consume a corpse, you get this X 9% increased damage that is multiplied to your overall damage. It's not additive to anywhere, it's like a separate damage bucket. So it's really good. So now you kind of realize why skill tree passives are important, even though the actual figure that they provide here is low. Like it's just 9%, right? It's not like 20 or 30%. But it's actually multiplicative, which means that it has a much bigger impact than the other damage bonuses that are additive within their individual buckets. Okay, but it's still not so bad because we have quite a diverse number of damage buckets here. Essentially, you can call it 8 buckets. I know that some of the videos out there are saying 7 buckets, which is not wrong. 7 buckets here. But I like to include this so that it's clear also that you still have one more category, which is all your X increased damage rather than the plus increased damage. Plus increased damage will be like damage while, damage versus, damage from, damage with. So the best example that I can give here is, say, for example, if you have 50% damage while you're healthy, and you have 50% damage while you, 50% increased damage while you're fortified. What this means is that you get 100% total damage in damage while bucket if both conditions are met. And you get another 100% total damage in damage. If you have another 100% total damage in the damage with bucket, it's a total of 400% increase. Okay? Because it's multiplicative. So 100%, you have a 100% increase onto the base, that's 200%. Now you multiply back you multiply that by another plus 100%, which is basically equivalent to times 2. So 200% times 2 gives you 400%. This is how the multiplicative across buckets work. If it was additive across buckets, what will happen is that it will be 100% base plus 100% increase from damage while plus another 100% increase from damage with. That gives you 300%. So do you see how good multiplicative is now? Once you have multiplicative involved, your damage bonuses from 3 times, it becomes 4 times. So the more type of damage buckets that you have, the better scaling of your damage. Okay. So this whole concept here actually makes building damage very diverse because there's so many different type of damage buckets, and it allows you to focus on getting different damage buckets. You don't always need to get vulnerable, for example. You can focus on, say, damage while, damage versus, damage from. 3 different buckets, and you still get a very high damage scaling in the end. I mean, obviously, you always get high mainstay and high critical strike as well. And you can also try to focus on getting more skill tree passives, giving you X increased damage. So this is the Theorycrafted version. But here's the thing. There was a pre-launch access for selected streamers, usually the bigger streamers for Diablo series. So they have gotten the chance to play Diablo 4 in a endgame state pre-launch. This is different from early access, the one that you pay, everyone can pay for. I should say everyone. Anyone can pay for if you have the money, if you are willing to spend the money, you get the early access. That starts like June 2nd or something. This pre-launch that I'm talking about is the one where the streamers actually got to play the game for weeks now. I think it was like 2 weeks or 10 days. And 30th May, the NDA was released. So that's why they are now coming out with all the information. And what we have here is a update to these damage buckets that is unconfirmed. Okay, unconfirmed because this is based on the pre-launch access feedback. What happens is that there are after these streamers during the pre-launch, they play with the game, they are giving a feedback that the damage buckets are actually more like this, where effectively the 4 conditional damage bonuses, the damage while, damage versus, damage from, damage with, are now all combined into one big bucket called the all plus increased damage. I mean, this name is arbitrary for sure. But what it means is that we are saying that all the different type of damage bonuses that we have, damage while healthy, damage while fortify, damage versus injured, damage versus elite, damage from golems, damage from dodging, damage with core skill, damage with lightning, damage with bleeding, etc. All of these are now added into one big bucket by itself. So this is unconfirmed. More testing is obviously required after the game is launched so that people can really verify this, especially the folks who did that theory crafting to come up with the multiple mirror of buckets. But if this is true, okay, if this end state is true, what it means is that there is a significant diminishing return in value for this type of damage bonuses here. So what it means is that, say, you're just using this example, everything here is one big bucket by itself. Instead of like, having from being a bucket by itself, wow is another bucket, versus is another bucket, with is another bucket, and this is from as well. So this is pretty bad in terms of build diversity. And let me talk more about this. So essentially what happens here is that because all of your damage bonuses is one bucket by itself, it also greatly increases the value of the other buckets because you have lesser buckets now. So the other buckets have increased value per se in relative comparison. So critical strike, it becomes more important, vulnerable becomes more important. In fact, both critical strike and vulnerable are extremely important and extremely significant in terms of contributing to your overall damage. So much so that I would say that you always have to take the two corresponding Paragon Glyphs. So there's always a Paragon Glyph with regards to critical strike. As far as I've seen for Barbarian and Necro so far, I haven't looked in detail for the other three classes. But essentially, there's always one where it's related to critical strike and also your resource as well. Okay, usually it's the name of your resource. So for Necromancer, it's called Essence, the glyph. For Barbarian, it's called Wrath. Okay, it's not called Fury, but kind of similar Wrath. But the general gist of it is that there should be there should be a critical strike or critical chance related glyph for your class. And then there will also be a glyph that's called exploit. That's always with regards to vulnerable. So for Barbarian, there's a exploit, and exploit's additional bonus is always granting you a 3-second vulnerable with a 20-second cooldown. While vulnerable, or rather the exploit glyph on Necro, is giving you X percentage increased damage based on the number of hits that you do or something like that. Okay, so there's always going to be these two glyphs here. They may differ in terms of how they interact, but basically you will always have one critical strike and one vulnerable for each specific class. And this and given how the damage bucket is working here, with everything being lumped into one all plus increased damage bucket where you get a significant diminishing return this way, it's actually very important to get vulnerable and critical strike, the Paragon glyphs for them. Okay, to max out the character. And if you have Paragon boards, go for it as well. For say critical strike or vulnerable. But what I don't like about this is basically your build diversity suffers because you pretty much always must have a reliable vulnerable application. It's basically a must-have for solo. Previously, when you have so many damage buckets, you can actually forego vulnerable if you want to. You don't need like a super reliable application of vulnerable. You can go with maximizing your damage across all these 4 buckets, for example, and you still get a very good damage scaling because they multiply against each other. Now, because everything is one bucket, you pretty much have to get vulnerable. You have to invest in vulnerable. Your critical strike becomes even more important in investing in it. Like for example, when I was doing all the theory crafting for my builds, right, be it the Necro or the Barb builds, what happened was that sometimes I don't even get the critical strike glyphs because I assume that there's enough to be obtained from the gear. Oh, and apparently people are saying that it's actually kind of tough. You don't get as much critical stats as you do compared to say Diablo 3. So the critical strike glyph becomes even more important now. Okay. So without vulnerable, which is a complete separate multiplier, and the combined with the fact that everything here is additive, you're going to suffer a lot in terms of damage scaling. So for a solo player, right, you need to do builds that have very reliable, vulnerable application. So what comes to mind would be, say, for example, Bone Spear Necro. Extremely reliable, it's 100%. Or the Barbarian with Whirlwind and the passive that allows you to get a lucky hit on vulnerable. Because of the multiple hits from Whirlwind, it pretty much allows you to get it, get a more or less reliable vulnerable application. And on top of that, the vulnerable glyph, the exploit glyph for Barbarian guarantees you vulnerable every time for the first time you hit enemies. So it comes together nicely. But it does mean that you always have to get vulnerable. If your build has no vulnerable, for example, say like a full blood skill focus without using the corpse tendril, you're gonna be in trouble. Well, I can't say that you're gonna be in trouble. It's more like you won't be able to clear top tier content. You won't be a top tier build per se. You have to have vulnerable. Of course, this is mainly for solo. If you are playing in a group, playing a party, you can always rely on either a Z DPS role or some other DPS where you always apply vulnerable. You have someone else to help you apply vulnerable. Because remember, vulnerable is the status of enemy. As long as someone is applying that vulnerable, everyone else benefits. So you can even go for some kind of build where you max out your damage without vulnerable, and you have someone else apply vulnerable so that you then skill even greater than say a solo player. But that's group play. So if you're like me, you intend to play solo, your build choices now become limited if you want top tier. If you want to play just what you enjoy, then for by all means go ahead, do it. Enjoy what you want. This is what I say in Genshin Theorycrafting as well. Okay, so yeah, this like I say is a very, very straightforward and simple video. So just to give one last analogy, because I was doing Genshin Theorycrafting before this, so I'll just quickly explain to you guys. Don't you think that this looks like, if you're a Genshin player, right? Don't you think that this looks exactly like Genshin's damage setup? You have all the damage bonuses coming into one damage bucket by itself. You have vulnerable, which I guess you can think of it like a resistance threat or reducing or lowering enemy resistance. Okay, because it's also a so-called status on a enemy per se. And there's also critical strike. This also means that your attack or HP scaling, whatever the case is, and you have an X increased damage, which you can think of as like specific characters having multiplier, like Yoimiya's E and Xingqiu's E. So, sorry, not Xingqiu's E. Xingqiu's, I think it was the Constellation of Passive. I can't remember which it is. But basically, this is what it looks like, and they basically dumb down the Diablo 4 damage buckets to very similar to Genshin. That's what I'm trying to say here. But regardless, it doesn't. I mean, the previous damage bucket would be better, but this just means that you always focus on vulnerable and critical strike as your priority. You're still going to try to get more of this, right? But you need to make this vulnerable and critical strike your priority, along with X increased damage from your passives. Alright, so that's all I have for you guys with regards to damage buckets. I hope this video has been helpful in understanding how the damage buckets work and how best to optimize your damage. Now, with all of this in mind, and also all the new information that we have from the pre-launch streamers who got to play the game and were able to share more endgame build kind of information, I will update my builds. But generally speaking, the most straightforward update will be to simply replace some of your glyphs with vulnerable and critical strike if you do not already have those. Yeah. But I will share a updated build for my Whirlwind Berserker Barb, because it's quite a big change for the Whirlwind Berserker Barb, because now that we want vulnerable, things are really changing. I mean, I even have to change one of the bots, and we are changing the gear. We are kind of changing some of the interactions and build, because we also now have an idea on how much cooldown is required, whether or not we really need this Empower Glyph, and also like stuff like how much damage reduction, how much defensive capabilities we need. So yep, look forward to my next video. That's what I will talk about, which is the Whirlwind Berserker Barb updated with all the pre-launch information, as well as this updated damage bucket setup here. Okay, thanks everyone for watching. If you like the content, remember video and click subscribe for more. Bye.